Okay, guys, if you wanted to see a 2017 ripoff of the movie Alien, that's right, a ripoff of the 1979 film Alien, this is the film for you. It is called Life from 2017, 67% on the tomato meter, 54% on the audience score. It has 33,000 plus audience ratings. And I'll have to say that, yeah, I agree pretty much with that 54% audience score. I would say that this deserves to be about half rotten. It's not completely bad, but it is still rotten. It's not fresh, and I'm going to give you my reasoning for that. Not only is it a ripoff of 1979's The Alien, but it is a version of that which is very much filled with plot holes, and I do mean a whole list of plot holes. I have a list here. I've got about 6 or 7 plot holes. I'm sure there are more, but I was easily able to find 6 or 7. Now, another criticism I have of this movie is that it all pretty much takes place on the International Space Station. As of 2020, even in 2017, during the making of this film, we have all seen via YouTube video, via the NASA Space Channel, via all kinds of news reports, what the space station actually looks like. It is very bright, it is very white, it is very sterile, and we all have a pretty good mental image of the way that's supposed to look. However, this film, wanting to be inside of the horror genre, like the original 1979 Alien, which is also a horror movie. This wanted to also be a horror movie, and so it darkened everything down, dirtied everything up a bit, and it's a version of the ISS, which doesn't really look like the real ISS. And I will also say, without any kind of reservation, that the visual effects presentation of what the Earth looks like from the ISS, it is certainly a nice looking visual effects presentation of what the Earth would look like. However, it also doesn't look anything like the Earth looks when you're on the ISS, and we've all seen the videos taken from different parts of the ISS that have windows that can see the Earth, and I'm talking about largely that section of the ISS which is called the cupola. We know what that looks like, and if you don't somehow know what that looks like, just look on YouTube for ISS cupola view of the Earth, and it looks fantastic. However, in this movie, again, because it wanted to darken everything up, it showed you a version of the Earth. While it looks kind of realistic, it looks nothing like the bright, clean and crisp images of the Earth that we have in the real world from the ISS. This looks like a soft and fuzzy and darkened version of the Earth, and it's a little bit overly detailed as far as the city lights at night and etc. Now, that's not the fatal flaw here. That's not what makes this thing rotten. It's just like a large part of why I couldn't take it completely seriously and I couldn't get too far into it. The believability factor wasn't there for me because of the visual imagery trying to be too dark and fuzzy and soft and like a horror movie, and that doesn't go along with the ISS. But the actual reason I find this rotten is because of all the plot holes, all the logical fails. As far as a horror movie, it's actually pretty effective. There were scenes which made me uncomfortable, and I felt tension. However, just too many plot holes for me to maintain that tension, for me to go all the way to the end of this thing and get a positive outcome, if you will. Okay, a quick rundown on the plot. This basically, it's a story about astronauts on the ISS that are tasked with recovering some kind of Martian soil samples that have been, I don't know, they've been extracted from Mars and sent back on a probe towards Earth. And I don't understand the logic behind this. I don't know why you would need to have some kind of capsule come from Mars and be retrieved by the ISS. It would be far more effective to just have this sent straight back to Earth and re-enter the Earth, and without the ISS being involved at all. But for some reason, this movie needs it to be that the ISS astronauts are going to analyze samples that have been returned on some kind of return capsule from Mars. And inside the soil samples, there's some type of microorganism, and this microorganism, of course, due to negligence of the scientists, it grows larger and feeds on things and feeds on them and becomes an alien menace. And basically the plot of Alien, only done a little bit differently at the beginning. Let's just say you've got an alien trapped on board the ISS with the astronauts, and the astronauts are getting picked off one after the other, and etc. And will the alien monster make its way back to Earth, or will the valiant astronauts be able to somehow eject it off into space or whatnot? It's very reminiscent of the 1979 film Alien, like I have said. This movie stars Jake Gyllenhaal, Ryan Reynolds, Rebecca Ferguson, and a few notable others. However, it's Jake Gyllenhaal and Rebecca Ferguson that are our main characters that we follow throughout the entire story. They're the survivors until the end. And I'll say that most of these characters, they did their jobs just fine. Their acting performances weren't bad or good. They were completely just passable. I had very little to note on their acting performances. But having said that, let's get right to the audience reviews before I get to my plot problems and see what the audience reviewers bring up as far as why they think this is rotten. We have the first one from January 20, 2020, which is about a month ago, a little bit less than a month ago. Half a star. I was offended by how stupid this movie was. Spoilers: violation of containment protocols is standard in alien virus bug gets away movies, so okay, pass there. But the motivation and knowledge of the alien is the most offensive, stupid pill to swallow. The alien is reacting in self-defense to the shock, okay, but why does it want out of the lab? If its motivation is feeding off coolant, okay. Coincidence that it takes down the communication by feeding off coolant and is in the little hole to jump out onto the woman's face. Yeah, this reviewer is talking about, something I did write down at several points in this film. This alien starts out as a single-celled amoeba-type organism that's dormant. The astronauts, through their own incompetence, awaken it and feed it, and in the process it grows into a giant monster and starts killing them all. Well, this is definitely a creature spawned from a single-cell organism, and yet it somehow is smarter than all of the astronauts. It has figured out the entire layout of the ISS. It has figured out that it's in space. It has figured out that the astronauts are a food source. It has figured out how to outsmart the astronauts into finding out a scheme to escape and get back to Earth. It makes really no sense, because the only thing the movie gives us on why this alien organism is so super smart is just that it is. And the movie shows us the shocked reactions of the astronauts on board when they find out that apparently it's smarter than they are, but no explanation on why a single-celled organism is suddenly in possession of it knows everything about the International Space Station and how to circumvent containment protocols and how to get from one part of the system to the other. And there are some convenient plot holes and technical snafus, and there's a whole lot of incompetence on the part of the astronauts to make all this work as well. That's why, despite the fact that this had me with tension and it had me at times I found this hard to look at times, and I found that this was it was having a horror type effect on me, but it was just outweighed by the stupidity that was going on. And number one on the stupidity list was that the alien was just somehow super smart and knew everything. Not believable, and that's what this reviewer is saying. And this movie suffers from one of the biggest cliches that not only the Alien franchise has suffered from this, but almost every other sci-fi / horror genre film out there suffers from the same type of trope in which, communications with, the good guys, communications with Earth, or communications with backup forces, or communications where, you're isolated group of astronauts or heroes would somehow be able to use a radio transmitter to call for help. Well, conveniently, this radio transmitter is going to fail. and the internal communications inside the space station are going to conveniently have static and not work sometimes just for the sake of the plot. And we've seen these tropes in almost every sci-fi horror film out there, and it was no surprise that this film did the same thing. However, this film straight up ripped it off from Alien worse, because right from the beginning, what is the first thing that the alien does when it starts feeding on the astronauts? It somehow learns how to disable the communications back to Earth from the International Space Station, so that the astronauts, when they finally get around to trying to call for help, they just can't, because the aliens already disabled the transmitter. Yeah, I'm sure a single-celled organism, it's going to, in a few minutes, figure out how transmitters on the International Space Station work, and that it needs to disable those to prevent the astronauts from getting help. Yeah, it suffers from that old trope, and I'm going to call it a trope because every damn sci-fi horror movie does this. Somehow the transmitter's down, and one or two of the astronaut heroes are going to have to go on a very dangerous mission to try to restore that transmitter, and in the process, of course, they'll get killed. And that's what they did in the Aliens, the sequel to the Alien movie, and that's what they did in this film too. And you could see it coming from a million miles away in this film, which made it very ineffective. And I'll also say that, the only reason that the astronauts weren't able to call Earth for help or tell them what the fuck was going on is because not only did the alien quickly learn how to disable their radio transmissions back to Earth, but also before that even happened, the astronauts were just so confused and overwhelmed by seeing the alien creature attack one of them that they just didn't even think about radioing Earth or telling them what was going on for quite a long time. And then, of course, by the time they decided to get around to it, oh, what do you know it, the aliens figured out how to not only escape, but he's disabled the transmitter, and somebody's going to have to go out there on a dangerous spacewalk outside the craft to try to fix that transmitter. And guess what? They're not going to make it back in alive. And I knew this, and it was too obvious, and that's why this film deserves to be rotten. But let's move on before I get too sidetracked. 2 stars, and I'm not going to entertain anything above a 3-star rating because this is Rotten Reviews for a reason. So here we go, 2 stars, November 4, 2019. A single cell becomes the unstoppable alien Terminator named Calvin in a matter of minutes. Yeah, the lead scientist, that's a biologist that's so fascinated with this alien single-celled organism, when he rejuvenates it back to, being alive and growing larger and feeding off of glucose and etc., he names it Calvin and plays around with it, and he's incompetently playing around with this alien life form that he has named Calvin. And of course, what's going to happen. His stupidity and playing around with it is going to get him killed in a horrific way, and it's going to escape, and that's exactly what happens. There's a lot of pain and gore involved in it, and I'm just glad I wasn't there to have my hand mutilated by the alien. But in any case, yes, let's read on. At the same time, the 6 astronauts prove to be the biggest failures humankind has ever seen, since they mess up absolutely everything during the entire film. The acting is good, and so are the effects, but that's about it. Yeah, these are incompetent astronauts. They are incompetent in so many ways. Now, the crew on the ISS, they all have their mission specialties. You have your biologist running biology experiments. You have your mission commander. Maybe he's knowledgeable on some other field. You have different people doing different things with experiments and whatnot, different specialties. Every one of these astronauts, conveniently, they all speak English perfectly, which is also not quite realistic on the ISS. These are all English-speaking astronauts, and they conveniently are all very stupid in different ways and do the dumbest things. And if they had not been incompetent to begin with, the alien would have never escaped containment. It would have never grown larger. It would have never killed anybody or hurt anybody. Everything would have been just fine. But nope, they had to fuck it all up because every one of them does all these incompetent things. First on the chopping block is Ryan Reynolds. He's killed off the first person killed off in this film, and I was kind of glad to see him killed. He deserved to die for his incompetence, and I was actually glad when I saw him die. At a certain point in this film, I actually wanted to just see all these astronauts just get blown out a hatch and all die in deep space or in space, floating out around the Earth somewhere. That's what I was wishing by the time I got halfway through this. I just wanted to see them all die. Just blow them all out the airlock and spare me having to watch this whole thing. But unfortunately, no. It takes quite a while to kill them all off, one or two at a time. Very painfully and gruesomely at that. Let's move on. Half a star. August 23rd, 2019. Garbage ending. What a waste of time. Yeah, the garbage ending. The movie tries to do a plot twist where it tries to convince you one thing is going on, and yet it's the exact opposite thing that's happening. And it doesn't work. It just served to confuse me. And when they tried this twist in the film, I said, what? Wait a second. That's not what I saw before. The director did a really bad job of editing the ending. Like, he tried to make a twist out of it, but he didn't set it up properly. So it was confusing at the end. You're wondering, wait a second, that's not what I saw. So how could it be like that? Very big fail on the director's part, the editor's part, on how to set up a twist ending. It just didn't work. Let's go to my list before we get too deep into this. First thing on my plot list of problems, why is the International Space Station involved in capturing soil samples from Mars? That's number one. It doesn't make sense. Number two, the way that they show the International Space Station astronauts retrieving this Martian soil sample satellite or capsule or whatever it is coming from Mars. NASA would never do this in the way they're showing it. It's incredibly dangerous. It's stupid. It's incompetent. And they could have all been dead just from their stupid antics of trying to catch this Martian soil sample. The movie tells you that this was their mission. They knew this was going to happen and they were going to have to retrieve this Martian capsule as it came back to Earth. Okay, but the way they do this is the most dumb way. There's no way NASA would approve of any of this, not even one aspect of it. It is completely harebrained and stupid and illogical, and it just failed for me right there when I saw how they captured this capsule coming back from Mars. There's no way in hell the Russians or NASA would attempt something like this. It's just stupid. A complete plot fail. Let's see, the next thing on my plot list. Yeah, they already had proof of Martian life. They had proof of life coming from someplace other than Earth. You know, they're shown trying to trying to bring this single-celled organism that was in a soil sample back to life. And then after they bring it back to life, they celebrate that they proved now that there's life from elsewhere. However, just by the fact that they had discovered that single-cell organism was enough. That's all they needed. They didn't have to go through all this other bullshit to try to rejuvenate, to try to come up with some harebrained scheme to bring it back to life. That's not what they needed to do. They could have just called it a day. They would have already been heroes. They would have had their names in the record books for it. But nope, everybody on Earth celebrates the discovery of alien life only after they go through all this bullshit to bring this single-celled organism back to life. It's a plot fail. It really is. So what's next on my plot list? Well, yeah, like I mentioned, Ryan Reynolds' character is the first one to get killed off, and he gets killed off because he's trapped inside the lab with this creature as it escaped from its containment tank, and he's trying to hunt it down with this flamethrower device. Again, something taken out of the movie Alien, but done in a little bit of a different way. And this little portable flamethrower or incinerator unit that he's using, it of course has a fuel limit to it in its tank, and it runs out of fuel. And after it runs out of fuel and he still hasn't burned up this alien organism, it of course is able to attack him and kill him. And he's trapped inside this room, in this lab, this sealed up lab. Now, later, not very long later, like a few minutes later after it kills Ryan Reynolds' character in a very bloody, gruesome way, later the alien is able to escape from the lab because of a fire suppression system that activates. And that fire suppression system activates only because that torch, that flamethrower device that was out of fuel before, suddenly it has fuel again and has a flame coming out of it, and it's able to torch some sensor or part of the flame fire suppression system. Plot fail. They just said it was out of fuel. They showed it being out of fuel, and then all of a sudden it just has fuel again because they couldn't come up with a better way for the alien to escape the room, so they needed some way for the fire suppression system to go off. Completely dumb. They should have done this before the thing ran out of fuel, but in any case, it's a big plot fail. Let's move through some more audience reviews, and I'll return back to plot problems and go back and forth and whatnot. 2 stars. Rai and Jakey Jakes reporting for duty. They shouldn't have. Life, Daniel Espinosa, the director, has a pretty simple pop culture vocab. It ought to suck viewers in and leave none the wiser. The simple beings will whirl merrily around the cheap thrills, and the smarter ones exhausted. Well, they're trying to be cute with some kind of poem on this review. I'm going to skip it. I'll take the 2 stars, though, and if I had to put my own star count on this, which I do, I am going to give it 1.5 stars because it still gripped me and made me uncomfortable a few times, and I still watched it to the end. So even though I think it's rotten, I'm going to give it 1.5 stars. But let's read another 1-star review from October 9. Very bad. What starts with an interesting proposal gets totally lost in the course of the movie. It gets confusing and bad. I wouldn't say it's confusing, but there's a lot of plot holes, so maybe that's what they mean. 3 stars. Not English. Okay, so let's move on. 3 stars again. Kind of a ripoff to the legendary Legacy of Aliens, but still a good movie with good plot and interesting characters. No, I'm sorry. 1 star, September 15. Frankly disrespectful to real astronauts and professionals in the space industry. If you're going to do a film based on reality, the ISS, then please do it right and make the film at least semi-realistic. These morons would not become astronauts as they are emotionally unstable, disobedient, and stupid individuals. Then there's the nonsensical ISS setup. Astronauts have their own private space because if they slept in glass boxes next to their crewmates, yeah, it does a lot of things wrong. I think the only thing they got semi-right about this whole ISS mock-up set is the toilet facility. From what I can tell, they got that part kind of right. But yeah, the astronauts in this movie, they sleep in these like almost cryogenic looking chambers. I'm sorry, but that's not how they sleep on the ISS. They sleep in almost like a hammock-like type thing. So they straight up failed on that, trying to give it like a sci-fi edge or an alien movie type edge. So that was a fail. And I already mentioned that the lighting levels and just the look of it were too dark to pass for the real ISS. But also, yeah, the astronauts are emotionally unstable, no question about that. It didn't take much to get them all excited and bickering with each other, and they very much acted like people that you just threw together from other walks of life that happen to be stuck on the space station. We all know astronauts aren't like that. They're very mission-orientated. They almost all have military backgrounds and go through rigorous training and psychological exams. So this movie is a complete fail on that. It needed them to be over-emotional, make stupid decisions on emotions, and they got themselves killed by their own incompetence. So they are basically insulting astronauts on the real space station. They're basically making NASA and even the Russians look like incompetent morons. So I'll say that I hope NASA didn't cooperate with them on this movie because this movie didn't do them any favors. 3 stars, subtle plot, yet riveting. Well, it was a little disturbing in the ways that the monster killed the astronauts, but we've seen this before in other movies. Unfortunately, just these disturbing astronaut deaths weren't enough to make this thing fresh. It was still very much rotten. And let's go back to my plot holes. Yeah, the lab isn't really sealed. Like, they talk a lot about firewalls. Like, they talk about their security measures with these samples. They say, well, this was our first firewall. Like, the containment vessel with the soil sample inside, that was firewall number 1. The lab itself with its, the lab being sealed up to a certain amount, that was firewall number 2. And then later on in the movie, it mentioned something that none of the astronauts knew except for the mission commander, and that was called firewall 3. The final firewall, what happens if some alien organism manages to escape from the lab and get out of control on board the station? Then that comes into play later, and that's also a plot problem because we know that all the astronauts on board the ISS, they're all briefed on every aspect of the mission. It's not like all of them are kept in the dark and there's some kind of secret orders or secret thing going on that only the mission commander would know. That works in a Hollywood movie, but that's not the way it works for NASA, and that's not the way it works on the International Space Station. All the astronauts are well aware of procedures and what the protocols are. However, in this movie, there's a firewall number 3 that nobody knows about except for the mission commander, and that's the final firewall where if you're cut off from communication or mission control thinks that the alien's loose on the ship, what do they do? They don't come to rescue you. They actually send a Soyuz module up with fuel and rockets on it to presumably push the space station out into outer space, to push it away from the Earth, which is ridiculous, and it's another thing I've written down that's ridiculous about this movie. But yeah, they talk about these firewalls, and it's completely ridiculous because it again shows that NASA would be incompetent in all this. And let's do another plot problem while we're at it. Several parts of this movie hinge upon the fact that, according to this film, this is the way it works. You're either in orbit of the Earth or you are in deep space. There's nothing in between. And the space shuttle, or not the space shuttle, but the Soyuz modules that bring supplies up to the space station, and the space station itself presumably have fuel that they can burn rockets and they can move themselves into deep space. And the Soyuz modules can push the space station into deep space. And the Soyuz modules themselves have rockets where you can fly them off from the space station. And instead of choosing to re-enter Earth's atmosphere to go back to Earth, you can actually point them into space and fly off into deep space. And they keep using this term deep space, but no genius involved with this movie apparently actually looked into how any of this works, because there is nowhere on the International Space Station and nowhere on any Soyuz modules or all of that stuff put together, there's nowhere in any of that hardware enough fuel up there at any time to push anything into deep space. They seriously don't understand just how powerful the Earth's gravitational field is and how much fuel it would really take to leave the Earth's orbit. Yeah, you can push yourself into a higher orbit, but you're not leaving the Earth's orbit. You're not going into what they're calling deep space, which is really just outer space. You're not going into outer space without a significant amount of fuel, and they just don't have that on board the space station because it wasn't designed for that. And those Soyuz modules were designed to go up and then return back to Earth, and that's it. They don't have fuel where they can fly off out of Earth's orbit. It's completely ridiculous, and yet this movie just calls it deep space. Again, stupid. Let's move on before I get too sidetracked. 2 stars, July 26, 2019. Great CGI and visual effects, but my God, the story was boring and predictable. Yeah, because it's a ripoff of Alien and a lot of other movies we've seen over the last few decades. And yeah, it's gripping in a few parts, but all of those other ripoff movies were just as equally grotesque and gripping and tenseful. But this thing's just another one. And, you know, there was nothing unique about it. Nothing memorable other than the fact that it's a waste of a lot of big-name actors. 1 star, July 3rd. Can't give it 0 stars. Where it failed to achieve realism, it made worse with overdramatic, poor acting, and terrible scripting. Did any of the writers take 8th grade science? My friend 7th grader understands orbital mechanics better. Yes, like I have explained, it's not that complicated to understand that you're not going to leave Earth's orbit with any of the equipment on the space station. It wasn't designed for that. But let's move on. 1/2 star. This is well photographed, and the Zero-G Sfx are great. Yeah, the Zero-G effects are pretty damn good. I didn't detect any flaws with it. It looked realistic. Now, I can quibble over the choice of the camera positions. I don't think they were that great. I think when you're in a zero-G environment, you have a lot of opportunities as a director to put the cameras in fantastic looking places and show us things from unique perspectives. But this movie failed to do that. It failed to give us anything visually new. In fact, a lot of rip-off B movies have done the cinematics in the zero-G environment much better than this one did. Just lack of imagination on the part of the director. He just wasn't up to the job. But anyway, I'll continue. Once again, a bunch of supposedly highly trained astronauts dissolve into emu puddles and start acting irrationally from literally the first challenge they encounter. Totally unbelievable from the start. Yeah, it didn't even take much. It didn't take much at all to go wrong before all the astronauts are seriously stressed out and panicking and bickering with each other. And we just know that's not the type of people that are on board the ISS at any time. 2.5 stars. Alien meets Venom. Not a bad film, but a ripoff of Alien, which is a far superior film. Ryan Reynolds is once again playing Deadpool. The rest of the cast are much better as they can act. The characters are really stupid and probably deserve everything they get from doing stupid things. Yeah, I'll say that I wanted to see them go out the airlock. You know, when we're towards the final act of the film and there's only like 3 characters left alive, I wanted to just see all of them just get sucked out into space because I was sick of all of them. They were completely stupid and did stupid things. And the alien wasn't, I didn't want to see the alien kill them. I wanted to see the alien and them all just get blown out into space, really. That's what I wanted. Didn't get my wish, unfortunately. 1 star, June 13, 2019. The actors were good enough, but the characters were as dumb as rocks. Let's play with the alien life form. A dumb story, to be sure. Yeah, and they couldn't even figure out where the alien life form really came from. At one part of the film at the very beginning, it spends a lot of time showing you some pointless star fields with very small spaceship objects floating. I almost couldn't tell what the hell was going on, and I was wondering when something was going to happen. But when it finally showed me this like satellite looking escape pod thing coming from Mars, it showed like it was traveling along through space just fine, and then it got hit by some kind of meteor shower. And it actually showed that perhaps this alien organism didn't even come from Mars, that it might have just been piggybacked on board on one of these asteroids or meteorites or meteors that hit it during its journey. And that's what it looked like the film actually showed. But then the rest of the film, the actors just straight up claim that this stuff came from Mars. And it's almost like the director kind of forgot what he did at the beginning, because at first I was straight up thinking, oh, the soil samples are contaminated, or the thing that came from Mars, the ship from Mars, got contaminated by those rocks that hit it, because it shows a debris like rocks hitting it at high speed as though maybe that's where the alien came from. But nope, the rest of the film, they straight up just say it came from Mars, and that's what everybody goes with. So, okay. It is very dumb. 0.5 star. Made no sense. There were so many opportunities for them to neutralize the predator, but they didn't. Instead, intelligent astronauts with years of training made one silly amateurish mistake after another, painful to watch. Yeah, they were just completely incompetent. And it also showed that, they have this super high-tech sealed up laboratory setting that they called Firewall Number 2. And yet all it took was the fire suppression system to open, and the alien was able to escape through the fire suppression system into just the rest of the ship after that. So yeah, so much for your foolproof lab. That's ridiculous. A sealed lab wouldn't have like these big giant fire suppression sprayer valves that, just open up and whatever it is that's in there can escape out into the rest of the, not even just, the alien didn't just escape into like the cooling system or the fire suppression system, which is what you would logically think. No, when the alien actually went up into one of the fire suppression nozzles, one of the astronauts, when he's looking at the instrument display on board, he tells another astronaut, well, it can go anywhere now. Really? What about being trapped inside with the tank that holds all the fire suppression stuff? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It goes into the fire suppression system, and then that's like saying something could go into your bathroom shower head, it can go into your bathroom spigot, and then now it can be in your attic up in the air conditioner. What? That doesn't make any sense. These things aren't connected like that, but the movie didn't care, just straight up went with it. 2.5 stars, May 7, 2019. Really well executed and partially exciting sci-fi horror that doesn't manage to reinvent the wheel, nor even tries to. Really well executed? No. While the look of the space station is close to the realism of gravity, no, it's not. The trope in which every tense situation kills off one crew member is old and not particularly surprising. The creature is pretty cool, at least. Unfortunately, they went with a real shitty shock ending. If I ever want to see pretty well-known actors die rather horrible deaths, I would. Oh wait, no I don't ever. Yeah, exactly. I pretty much agree with this, except for, this doesn't look like the space station in Gravity. The movie Gravity did a fantastic job of making the International Space Station look exactly like the International Space Station. If you don't believe me, go find videos from NASA on YouTube. You can easily compare it to the movie, and you can say, wow, the director of Gravity, he did a fantastic job. This movie, it does not look like the International Space Station. It looks like a cross between the International Space Station and the old Nostromo set from 1979's Alien, all dark and gritty. It didn't work for me at all, so I don't know what that reviewer was smoking when he said that. 2.5 stars. Reynolds doesn't really fit here. Yeah, Ryan Reynolds doesn't really need to be here. He doesn't do anything that's unique to his performance. He's just killed off pretty rapidly, and he's not an unlikable character or a comic relief character. He just makes a stupid decision and gets killed off rather quickly. He could have been played by anybody else. It really wouldn't make any difference. 2 stars, April 22nd. They weren't very smart for qualified astronauts in space. Made the human race look more stupid than we actually are. However, still exciting, and the ending just about justified the storyline. Yeah, the astronauts made humans look stupider than this single-celled organism. It was far smarter. It was exciting, not really, but it had tense and gripping, like gory parts, and the ending was dumb because it tried to be a twist ending, but it definitely didn't work because it wasn't edited properly to make it work. It was just confusing. You were left scratching your head wondering, wait a minute, that's not what I saw before. So it's a fail. 2 stars. I was not really impressed by this movie. Sure, it had the scary alien while trapped on the space station vibe, but it just didn't seem believable both in how the people reacted or how the alien behaved. I was like a series of unfortunate and stupid events in space. Yeah, very much. What other plot problems do I have on my list? Yeah, the lab isn't really sealed, is it? Nope. Yeah, the Earth transmitter magically fails due to the alien sabotaging it, and they have to go on the spacewalk, and yeah, mentioned that problem. Alien is smarter than the astronauts. He knows everything. Yeah, the alien knows about coolant systems. It knows about spacesuits and how they work. It knows about space. If it was an organism from Mars, how would it even know what space was or what it should do in space or what space suits were? I mean, what? Excuse me, it's a single-celled organism from Mars. It knows as much about space as, I have a pet cat that knows more about space than a single-celled organism from Mars would know, but it knows everything. Yep, deep space. I mentioned pretty much everything. Deep space, yeah, that's something you can get to just by pointing a Soyuz module and thrusting a bit. Let's finish these off. 1.5 stars. A truly awful movie executed on a grand scale. Sony once again defends its title as the champions of big budget trash. It is beautifully executed yet uninteresting, predictable, overly dramatized, scientifically foolish, and has a script of uninspiring dialogue rendered by a cast of actors cashing a paycheck. Pretty much spot on. 2.5 stars. If you want to see a movie that gets to the point quickly, watch this. Within the first 15 minutes, the end was obvious, and half the cast way dead. Okay, perhaps that was a smidge too dramatic and hyperbolic, but only a little. Although it did have some good moments and the quality and caliber of actor was high, the movie still fell flat. I suppose it's just an overdone concept. Yeah, we've seen variations of this over the last 30 plus years. It started with 1979's Alien. In fact, it probably didn't actually start there. It might have actually started a little bit earlier than that, but 1979's Alien's where this type of movie began. This movie rips off elements from it. It has a whole lot of insulting stuff to NASA in it. I mean, this could be considered on its own just an insult. Or if somebody wanted to make NASA look stupid and make astronauts look dumb, then this would be good propaganda for that. I don't even know why 67% of the critics thought this was fresh. They have very low standards. 54% audience score, like I said, I think that's fair. You could watch this one time if you have nothing else to do, but you already know how it's going to end. And like me, you're probably going to wish that all these astronauts, these incompetent astronauts, just get sucked out into space and put us all out of our misery. And I am going to see you on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.